All right. Good evening, everyone. No? Yes. So, welcome to the Torah studies. Parshas Beahaloscha. Beahaloscha Saneres. Talking about bringing up the lights. Every Yid is a candle. We got to bring up the candles, bring up the light. And who does that? Of course, Aaron HaKohen. The Kohen is the one to light the menorah. But the truth is that the Torah says that the adlaka, the lighting, is every Jew is able to light the menorah. Every Jew can be a leader, and a leader in lighting up someone else's menorah. Of course, starting from our own menorah. And so we spoke in a number of classes about quality of true leadership. And indeed, today's class is also talking about one aspect of that, what we learn from an amazing story in this week's Torah portion. What is the true quality of leadership? And leadership is caring for the people, caring for your fellow, even when it comes on the expense of your own growth. Now, we're not talking about at the expense of your own observing Torah mitzvahs. Whatever God commands us, of course, needs to be done and needs to be done right. But sometimes there's things that we can do and say, I have an opportunity to grow. If I avail myself to climb up the ladder, rather than worrying about the little things about my fellow, I can climb up. Here is an unbelievable lesson from this week's Torah portion. So let's begin. We know one of the stories in this week's Torah portion is the story of Pesach Sheni, the second Pesach. What is the story of the second Pesach? When the Jewish people came out of Egypt, God commanded them to bring an offering, the Paschal offering, to put the blood on the doorposts and so on. And that was the blood from the Paschal offering, from the circumcision. And that's how Hashem passed over the Jewish homes when he hit all the firstborn of the Egyptians. And then God commanded, he gave him the Torah after they left Egypt. He commanded them all the mitzvahs in the Torah. One of the commandments God commanded is to bring on a regular basis, every year when it comes the holiday of Pesach, on the day before Pesach, they should bring an offering of the Pesach, a Paschal offering. However, that was said to them to bring as soon as they get into Eretz Israel, to the land of Israel. So that was not meant to be done when they were in the desert. Then, a year after they left Egypt, a surprise gift from God, a surprise mitzvah that they did not expect. And God told them, this year, I want you to bring an offering of Pesach right here in the desert. That was something they didn't expect. Let's see it inside. Says the Torah. Vayidaber Hashem, God spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert in the first month of the second year of the Exodus of Egypt, saying, the children of Israel should bring the Paschal offering in its appointed time. Surprise. Beautiful gift. We understand the Jews, they appreciated what it means, a mitzvah. They knew what a mitzvah, a commandment of Hashem, the word mitzvah means connection. When you put on tefillin, you do a mitzvah. What is a mitzvah? It's a good deed, but the word mitzvah comes from the word tzavta. Tzavta means connection, because every mitzvah connects you to Hashem. There is no other way to connect to God. God is way above and beyond, and Hashem comes and He reveals Himself, and He gives us the opportunity to do yet another mitzvah. And of course, that mitzvah, the people, they responded enthusiastically. They did it with such great joy, as the Torah itself says. It says, "Vayasu es haPesach," and the children of Israel brought the Paschal offering in the Sinai desert in the afternoon of the 14th day of the month. They did it in accordance with all that God had instructed Moses. What does it mean they did it with all? Says the Sifri, with all what God instructed them. Says this was said in praise of the Israelites. They did precisely as Moses instructed them. So they were so excited about it, about the special, unexpected mitzvah that God gave them. But then this was said to them shortly before the holiday of Pesach. And then there were people who couldn't bring it. There were people who were not pure. In order to bring the Paschal offering, you have to be pure. If people are in contact with a dead body, you have to go, there's a process, what you have to do. You have to go to the mikveh, you have to be purified, and so on. And so some people couldn't bring it. But they didn't give up. And they went to Moshe, and it says, Lama nigara. As the Torah says, Vayehi anashim, several men were in a state of ritual contamination by the virtue of contact with a dead body, and were thus unable to bring the Paschal offering on that day. So they approached Moses and Aaron on that day, and they said to them, we are impure by virtue of contact with a dead body. And the famous words, what they said, Lama nigara. Why should we miss out? Why should we lose out and be unable to bring the offering to God among the children of Israel at the appointed time? So this is really something. It's a very unusual situation. The whole thing. You see, those people. They are demanding. First of all, it's a surprise mitzvah that they are being given, and those people who are unable to bring, they come and complain. They say, "We missed out," and they said right away. They said, "We are impure," meaning that they already gave the answer why they couldn't do it. But yet they said, Lama nigara. Usually when they say you missed something, you missed your anniversary, you snooze, you lose, they said. They say, what's the best way to remember your wedding anniversary? You know the answer. Forget it one time. Miss it one time. So, but these people, they insisted. They insisted, we don't want to lose out. We want to have it. And Hashem agreed. What happened? Hashem gave them another chance. Hashem said they can have it, a month later. And ever since then, not only they had it, but because of these few people that they missed out, but they didn't give up. And they said, yes, we insist, we want to have it. Because of that, Hashem gave the commandment not only for them, but for the future generations, that they should also, if anybody is impure on that day of the first Pesach, they're able to bring it the second time, let's say a month later. Никогда не поздно, as they say in Chinese, I mean Russian. So it's never too late. This is one of the lessons we learned from this story, is that there is no, this is the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe said, we learn from this story that you should never say it's too late. That Hashem commanded that whoever has missed the chance, even if he did it intentionally, he knew that you're not supposed to get impure. And he nevertheless did it, which in turn, by extension, teaches us the lesson of a person who missed an opportunity, committed something terrible, made a mistake, committed a sin. It's never too late to turn the clock back and to go back. And that is a powerful story in and of itself. But this story also shows of a great love between Hashem and the Jewish people. The fact that God gave him this mitzvah, and the fact that this brings out the fact that it's never too late to fix. Now let's talk about the chronology. When did it take place? We know this took place right in the first month. What is the first month? Of course, in the Jewish calendar, it goes a little confusing. You have the beginning of the year is on Rosh Hashanah, Tishrei, but the Jewish month actually is not and does not begin. The first month is not the Rosh Hashanah. It's the Nisan, the month of Passover. In the Torah is considered the first month. So this happened in the first month, the month of Passover, the month of Nisan. But if you look into the book of Bamidbar, the book of that we are in the midst, we are middle of chapter 9 in the book of Numbers. The beginning of the book of Numbers begins with an event that took place a month later. And the question is, why? Why do we have the beginning of the book, an event that took place a month later, and now 9 chapters later, we talk about the event that took place a month earlier? So let's see inside. This is what we read right in the beginning of the book of Bamidbar. It says, on the first day of the second month, this is how the book begins, the fourth book of the Torah, Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe, on the first day of the second month of the second year after the exodus of Egypt, God spoke to Moses in Sinai desert in the tent of the meeting, saying, count the congregation of the children of Israel by families following their father's houses, a head count of every male according to the numbers of their names. So the question is, why? And the answer is that the Torah is not a history book, and it is not written necessarily in a chronological order. As Rashi said, Ein Seder Mukdam U'Me'ucher B'Torah, the order of events in the Torah is not chronological. Not chronological. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But even though we say that it's not chronological, there has to be a reason. There has to be a reason why the Torah changes the order. That's what the Torah doesn't just randomly mess with the natural timelines unless there's a compelling reason to do so. And this is a quote from the Ramban, the Nachmanides. It says as follows: the entire Torah is in a chronological order, except for those occasions when the Torah specifies that the dates are out of order. Even in those cases, it is for a good reason and purpose, and proper purpose. So here's the question is, why? Why change the order? Why is the story of the second Pesach, which took place in the first month, after the story at the beginning of the book, which is the story of the counting of the Jews? But before we answer the question, we need to reinforce the question even stronger. So we know the Torah begins the books. We have 5 books of the Torah. Each of the 5 books, the beginnings of the books begin with a love story, with something that showcases God's love to the Jews. For example, we have the first book of Bereshis. What is the beginning of Genesis? It says, Bereshis bara Elokim, in the beginning God created the heaven and earth. And Rashi points out right away that the reason why the Torah begins with the story of the creation is only for the sake of the Jewish people. Because after all, the Torah is not a book of history. It's a book of laws, guidance. The Torah is about guidance. So why talk about the whole story of the 6 days of creation? So the first Rashi in Genesis tells us as follows: should the nations ever accuse the Jews of stealing Israel, the land of the 7 nations, the Jews will respond. The whole world belongs to God. He created it and gave it to the people he chose. It was his choice to gift it to them, and it was also his choice to take it from them and gift it to us. So the very first beginning of the book of Genesis is about praise of the Jews, about the good of the Jews. It showcases the love that Hashem has to the Jewish people. Same thing is with the book of Shmos. What does the book of Shmos begin? The book of Shmot, the book of Exodus, begins with listing the names of the tribes. Although they were already listed, again showing the love that Hashem has to the tribes, the children of Israel. The book of Vayikra. The book of Vayikra is the book of Leviticus. It says, Vayikra al Moshe, Hashem called Moshe. Rashi says also, the calling is a calling of love. And the book of Bamidbar, which we discuss now. The book of Bamidbar, book of Numbers, is about the counting of the Jewish people. Counting is also, as Rashi points out, God counts the Jews all the time because he loves them. When they emerged from the bondage in Egypt, God counted them. After they worshipped the golden calf, and many died in the plague, God counted them to determine how many had survived. The tabernacle was erected on the 1st of Nisan, and indeed, on the 1st of the following month, Iyar, God counted them. So you can say that this is why it begins the book with the story of the counting, because this is a story that showcases the love that Hashem has to the Jewish people. But the question is, if you want a story that showcases love that Hashem has to the Jewish people, there is no better story than this story that we are talking about. It's a story that you don't have to change the chronological order, a story that did happen the first day and the first month of Nisan, and that is that story. The story of Pesach Sheni, the second Passover. Why is this a story that shows the love? Again, like we just said, number one, it is a story of God showing love to the Jewish people by giving them randomly, unexpectedly, another mitzvah. They were supposed to do the mitzvah of Passover only after they entered the land of Israel, and here Hashem gives them, surprise, surprise, a new mitzvah, second year in the desert, bring a korban Pesach, bring an offering. And the way the Jewish people did it, they did it with such enthusiasm. And number three, the fact that those few people that couldn't bring it expressed their desire, the strong desire not to miss out. They also want to be part of it. And what happened? Hashem agrees. Hashem gives it to them. He gives them a second chance. And he allows them to do the mitzvah of Pesach, the second Pesach, not only that year, but every future year. Whenever a person misses out, Hashem says, yes, I give it to them. So the question is, isn't this story the most beautiful story to begin the book of Bamidbar? Why do you have to change the chronological order and begin with the story of counting of the Jews that happened a month later? Even though counting is also expressing love, but this is something much more, much deeper, not just counting them, showing them, giving them the mitzvahs and everything. That's a question the Rebbe asks. Let's see inside how the Rebbe asks this question. Says the Rebbe, God issued a special commandment after the tabernacle was erected, from which the Jews were otherwise exempt in the desert. This demonstrates their greatness and God's love for them. Then there is in the fact that Jews fulfilled this commandment perfectly, in accordance with all that God had commanded Moses. Moreover, this story flatters the Jews by demonstrating just how much they yearned to fulfill this commandment. Even those who were impure by virtue of contact with a dead body and couldn't bring the offering, they demanded and argued. They didn't give up. They said, why should we lose out from bringing this offering in its appointed time? And what happened then? God's love for the Jews is further expressed by the fact that God accepted the demand. And Hashem said, why should we, in their demand, what they said, why should we lose out? Hashem granted them the opportunity to fill in the gap by providing a make-up date for the Paschal offering. So this story is certainly much more a dramatic love story than just the census. So why change the whole chronological order and tell this story? Begin with a different story. And the answer is, yes, it is true. This story really shows a deep love between Hashem and the Jewish people. However, that story also has, if you look carefully into it, If you study it carefully, it also has an indictment. It is somewhat of not a good side of the Jewish people. Why? The not good side is that the fact was that 40 years when the Jewish people were in the desert, they didn't bring the offering of the Pesach. Only that year they brought it. But the rest, the 39 years, they didn't bring it until they entered the land of Israel. Says the Rebbe, he brings the Rashi. Rashi says, why did the Torah not begin with the Paschal offering? Because it is a disgrace to the Jews that throughout the 40 years of their sojourn in the desert, they only brought this one Paschal offering. So sometimes you have to be careful when you point out how much I love these people. You have to be careful because there could be something else that is brought out. If you begin the story, yes, it is a story that shows the love, but that was only 1 year. What about the rest of the 39 years? So that is considered a gnus of Israel, a disgrace of the Jews. And the question is why? Why is it a disgrace? After all, they were not commanded. So the Gur Aryeh says, an exception from a mitzvah is not equivalent to doing a mitzvah. When we say one who is unable to is unable is exempted by God, we mean that there is no punishment. Nevertheless, it is not the same as doing the mitzvah and receiving the merit. Here too, though they were exempt, it was a missed opportunity. Now you can ask, that wasn't the only mitzvah that they didn't do in the desert. There were many other mitzvahs that they only did when they came to Israel. However, it is different than the other mitzvahs. The Paschal lamb is different from all other commandments that were not obligatory in the desert. Those commandments were only activated when they entered Israel. But the Paschal offering had already been offered in the desert once before. And the Jews were exempted in the ensuing years. Therefore, missing out on this mitzvah is considered a loss despite the exemption. So yes, they were not commanded. And yes, they didn't have to bring it. But it's still considered a disgrace for them. And the question is why? We need to understand what exactly does it mean? Why is this a disgrace? If they were not commanded, okay, even though they were commanded one time, even in the desert, but the other years they were not commanded, 39 years they were not commanded to bring it. So why is it considered a disgrace for them that the fact that they didn't bring the 39 years if they were not commanded? And the answer is, you know what the problem is? The problem is that they didn't ask. You see, they were given opportunity. They saw that when Jews want something hard enough, strong enough, and they ask for it, they get it. They realized at that first surprise mitzvah that they got, the second year, and some Jews were impure and they couldn't bring it. They didn't give up. They said, Lama nigora, why should we lose out? Hashem granted it to them. That should have been for them a clue That should have been for them a message that if there is no commandment, it doesn't mean that you cannot get it. If there is, even when Hashem says no, you can still push and ask for it and get it. Get a second chance, get another opportunity. So the fact that for 39 years in the desert, they could have asked for Hashem, we want to have it. Yes, we had it the first year, we want to have it. They didn't do it. That is a disgrace of the Jewish people, in a sense. Says the Rebbe, even a child wonders why the Jews didn't demand the Paschal offering during the 39 subsequent years in the desert. Why should we lose out? Why did they not tell God that they wanted to bring a Paschal offering, especially since they knew that this offering saved them in Egypt and brought about their redemption? When a mere handful of Jews demanded, why should we lose out? God granted them the opportunity to bring the Paschal offering. If all the Jews would have pleaded for an opportunity to bring the Paschal offering, God would surely have consented. It was therefore disgraceful that throughout the 40 years of their sojourn in the desert, they only brought this one Paschal offering. Had they demanded of God, why should we lose out? They surely would have succeeded and been permitted to bring the Paschal offering during those 40 years. So this is the answer. So if you ask, is that story a good story? If you ask if that story is a good story to begin the book, it is a good story that shows the love of Hashem to the Jewish people. But you can't put it on the front page of the newspaper. You can't put it on the beginning, the opening of the book, because of that fact. Because of the fact that there is some disgrace there also, the reminder that the Jews, after all, didn't get the message and they didn't ask. And what is the lesson from here is number one, we should ask. Don't be embarrassed to ask. That's what the Rebbe says, Ad Masa, you got to demand from Hashem. We want Mashiach. We got to insist. If we will insist, Hashem will listen to us. It's got to come from the heart, got to come from deep inside. Okay? So this is answers the question, why the book does not begin with this story. But wait a second. The Jews didn't demand the Paschal offerings. They didn't demand that they want to have it all these 39 years in the desert. But what about Moshe and Aaron? What about Moshe and Aaron themselves? Didn't they care to have the offering of Pesach? Why didn't they ask Hashem the 39 years? Obviously, they were in a level they wanted to have it. Why didn't they ask Hashem? Didn't they care enough? Says the Rebbe. Yes, they cared. Of course they cared. They wanted to have it, but they shut their mouth. They didn't say a word. They didn't ask. Why not? Because there was something that they cared more. There was something that they cared about more than getting the Paschal offering. Well, what was this something that they cared more about? The honor, the dignity of the Jewish people. To explain, Moshe Rabbeinu, the leader, we find time and again how he would put everything away, he would give his entire being, his entire life, he would give up to save the Jewish people. And here in this case, imagine, the Jewish people are not asking for it, which shows the disgrace of the Jewish people. They're not asking for something that they should have asked. But if Moshe and Aaron would have come and say, Hashem, wait a second, we want to have the carbon. We want to have the offering. What would have happened? That would put the spotlight much stronger on the fact that the Jews didn't ask for it. So they said, you know what? I'm going to stay quiet. I'm not going to ask. Why? Because I don't want the Jews to lose the dignity, the fact that they didn't ask. It's a very powerful message here. Says the Rebbe, Jewish leaders are primarily and completely invested in thinking about the people and doing things for the people. Moses even risked his life for the Jewish people. He didn't merely risk his bodily life, he also risked his spiritual life. He said to God, if you don't forgive the Jewish people, erase me from your book that you wrote. Moshe Rabbeinu's entire life was Torah. Torah was everything for Moshe. Moshe said to Hashem, if you forgive the people, this was of course after the sin of the golden calf. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, if you forgive the people, fine. If not, take out my name. I changed the color over here in the source. It says Exodus 32:32. One of my fellow shluchim pointed out that it's Lamed Beis, the verse that says, Moshe Rabbeinu says, if you don't forgive the Jewish people, take out my name, is written in the book, chapter 32, verse 32. What's 32? Lamed Beis is Lev, the heart. The heart of the book of Shemot is Moshe Rabbeinu's sacrifice. And he's ready to give up his everything for the sake of the Jewish people. True leaders don't think about what's good for them. They are wholly and completely dedicated to their people. And here the Rebbe explains this point. He says, had Moses and Aaron pleaded for the privilege of offering the Paschal lamb, it would have been granted to them. Not only to them and to all the Jews. God would have given it to them. He probably would have given to them. However, this would have compounded the disgrace of the Jewish people. It would have demonstrated that the Jews could have secured the privilege of this offering with a simple request, but they didn't. So that would have been, it would have amplified the disgrace of the Jews. To preserve the people's dignity, these faithful shepherds forewent the spiritual gain they could have accrued by pleading for it and bringing the non-obligatory offering. They gave it up and they didn't ask for it, even though they didn't get this privilege. And again, we're talking about a non-obligatory. If it would be a mitzvah, of course, they wouldn't give up a mitzvah. It would have been a commandment. Of course, they would do it. But this is not a non-obligatory mitzvah, and that they gave up because the dignity of the Jews comes first. Their entire life is given over to the people. We mentioned last week about the statement that the Rebbetzin made about her father. the Rebbe's wife, when there was the case with the books, the Rebbetzin said, when they asked her, the lawyers asked her, did the father own anything? So here's the accounting of Nathan Lowen. He was the lawyer representing Lubavitch in this case. And says the lawyers asked, the lawyers of the other side, they asked, did your father own things? His library and his books, weren't they his personal property? And the Rebbetzin said no. Surprised, they said, what do you mean? What do you mean when you say no? Didn't the Rebbe have personal property? And she responded, no. My father, the Rebbe, was the property of Chabad. He belonged to Chabad. And there was nothing that he had himself personally. So of course, yes, he has his things. It is a very powerful message that what it means a leader, that a leader is really completely and totally devoted and given over to the people. He himself, the words the Rebbe used to repeat this statement, what the Rebbetzin said. The Rebbe said, what the Rebbetzin says, the Tate, and the Sforim belonging to Chassidim. The father and the books belong to Chassidim. That's the way a true leader looks at his status. He's not his own person. He's the people. Number one is protecting the people. The Rebbe took this and the Rebbe educated us to teach that we should look at it at ourselves also like this. Every Yid, says the Rebbe, is a shaliach of Hashem, is an emissary of God. And the mission is to fulfill the mission to the fullest. There was a chassid, Oliver Shalom, passed away a few years ago. His name was Reb Shloime Matasov. Reb Shloime Matasov, he was the first shaliach that the Rebbe personally sent. And there's the story behind this Reb Shloime. He was born in the 1920s, 1930s, 1920s. He was born in Russia in the time of the revolution. And he was looking for a place to learn, to study Torah. He traveled to Georgia. 5 days took him to travel to Georgia. There was an underground yeshiva there. And then in 1931, he was arrested. There was a police sting operation to find people that they purchased. They attempted to get a false document to get out of Russia. And he was 16 at the time, 1931. And he was sentenced, he was 3 months in prison. Then they released him and he traveled to Moscow. In Moscow, they found another underground yeshiva. And he was there sitting and learning. And in 1935, he was arrested. And he was exiled. He was exiled far away. He was accused of being a part of an organization of the counter-revolutionary. And in the labor camp, in a place called Rybinsk, 250 miles northeast of Leningrad, he was there with another chassid, Reb Leizer Nanas, who was a famous chassid. And both of them, they stood in the principle and they made sure to keep Shabbat. In fact, there is a book that Rabbi Nanis wrote called Sabbato about what they went through to keep Shabbos under the worst circumstances. And then on Pesach, on Passover, and one year, for the whole week, he only ate beets because he didn't want to eat anything else that has a trace of bread or something. And in 1943, finally, after 5 years in prison, his sentence was commuted. There was a plan of to draft the prisoners to the Russian army. But then he realized that in the Russian army, he wouldn't be able to serve, to keep Shabbos. So he escaped. And he came to Turkestan. And over there he found, he was able to have a group of people. They gave him some new identity of a Polish Jew that passed away. And then he he traveled to Tashkent. And Tashkent, there was a group of Hasidim there. And he joined them until finally he was able to escape Russia with the Polish documents. After finally all these years, he left, he finally came out of Russia. He figured, oh, now finally I can come to go peacefully and sit and study Torah. He came to France and he decided to go to Israel, finally to build a family and to sit and to finally be able to serve God peacefully. But the Rebbe had other plans for him. The Rebbe sent him, he was the first shliach that the Rebbe personally sent, as I said. The Rebbe told him to go, from out of all places, he told him to go to Casablanca, Morocco. Be my shliach in Casablanca, in Morocco. Rabbi Matasov told the Rebbe, was concerned about moving to an Arab country. And the Rebbe told him, we are not just private individuals. We are to be beacons of light to illuminate the lives of others. 1, 2, 3 individuals. And that they will impact others who will touch all corners of the globe. Rabbi Matasov didn't need any other things. He went to Morocco and he was there as shliach of the Rebbe for 50 years. And together with his wife and family. And after he passed away, he brought him to Israel. And his sons came to visit Israel. And they visited the chief rabbi of Israel. It was the middle of former chief rabbi, Rabbi Amar. And when Rabbi Amar saw them, Rabbi Amar said to them, he went to them with them to the cemetery. And he said how their father, he says, the fact that he's today a religious Jew is because of their father. Trying to see, this is Rabbi Amar at the cemetery visiting the father's gravesite. So this is the story of Rabbi Matasov, but this is really the story of every one of us. The point, what we see, the leadership of Moshe Rabbeinu, the devotion that when it comes to a choice of having their own, the growing themselves in a high, much greater level, but if that means giving up of the dignity of the Jews, If they're not ready to come with me along and to lift them up together, I'm going to wait for them. I'm not going to say, okay, I want to grow, let's forget about the people. This is what the Rebbe taught us. This is what the Rebbe taught Rabbi Matasov. You have a mission. There's something, you're not just yourself, there's something bigger than you. So these are the two amazing lessons we learn from this story. The lesson of number one is that we have to demand, and that we have to ask for it. Even when things look, even according to all spiritual reasons that this is not for us, we can't give up. And it has to come from deep inside. And if we will demand and ask, we have to think out of the box and think about when we want something really strongly, Hashem will give it to us. And number two, be a leader. Be a leader, a true leader, and look around you. See who you can bring along with you. So thank you for joining. Should have a wonderful, wonderful Atzlachadike day. Atzlachadike Vach.
Thank you, Rabbi Cohen.
You're very, very welcome.